Hi there and welcome. Jonathan here. These talks are offered freely so that no one is ever denied access to these practices. Your support makes a big difference. If you feel inspired to make a donation, please go to jonathanfoust.com. Thank you. I remember this story I heard a long, long time ago of a pretty well-known actor who was telling the story of how he had so much trouble remembering his lines that he got fired from this big production, and it completely devastated him. And so he tried to let acting go, and he just had the acting bug, and he really wanted to get back into it. So he started in something off Broadway, I think, and it was a very, very small part because he had this real phobia about his lines. And in this production, he only had one line, and it was among, I think there were like 5 people who came on stage, and someone, I think his cue was someone said, "But where shall we go?" Then everyone would look at him, then he would say his line, and then they'd leave. That was just his way of sort of like titrating his way back into acting. But he was so afraid, and he just kept saying, "Don't blow your line. Don't blow your line. Don't blow your line." He knew the line, but and the night of the production, he was so fearful, "Don't blow your line." And then the scene happens, and the 5 people walk on, and he gets his cue, "But where shall we go?" And everyone turns toward him and he says, "Don't blow your line." That's what fear can do to us. We just sort of close down. I don't know if it was the holiday or the topic of last week's talk on transforming your relationship to fear, but as I was uploading some meditations from the fall retreat, I noticed there was this huge spike in downloads of that talk. I was just imagining all these people on Thanksgiving Day with their families, going to the bathroom and putting on the headphones. How do I transform this? So this is a little continuation on this topic of how to transform your relationship to fear. And what I'd like to talk about is to review a little bit some of the essentials of what happens when fear arises. And then to explore some strategies. One is how to investigate fear in the body, how to investigate fear in the mind, and then a classic practice that can be very powerful for kind of transmuting fear into light, if you will, through the Tonglen practice, if you're not familiar with that. So fear is something that happens all the time. I had my own experience of it this weekend. I was officiating a wedding, a beautiful Quaker ceremony. It kind of took me back to my Quaker roots, and there wasn't a whole lot to officiate because Quaker weddings are pretty much unprogrammed, but it was a beautiful ceremony, and oftentimes after I officiate a wedding, that's enough. I'm not super social, but I thought, I'd like to go to the reception and just to kind of say hi, because it's such a very cool and loving community. And I copied the address from the website. I put it in my calendar, and then I took it from my calendar and I popped it into my GPS. And I don't know Washington, D.C. at all. I just go where my GPS tells me. And you're getting ahead of me here. The address was in the Northwest. And I noticed that where the GPS was taking me, I had never been there before. And it was this kind of like interesting neighborhoods and starting to get kind of run down. And there were these buildings that I thought, they kind of look like projects. And I realized I was in a completely different quadrant of the city. And it was and the GPS was like, go down this alley and turn left. And I was like, where am I going? I could feel the fear beginning to rise. Just that, that feeling like there's something wrong. And it was quite tangible. I could feel a tightening in my belly, a tightening in my chest, the anxiety starting to spin. And I reset the GPS, and it took me off in a direction, then it took me back to where I was going, and it just wasn't making any sense at all. So it took me a while to just to get out of where I was and go back home. I never made it. I missed the window. But there are three basic levels of fear. There's the fear that you could call just general concern. I described it last week as you're driving the car, and in some part of your mind is don't die, don't die, don't die. Look out for that car, merge, stop, all of that. And then there's the fear that's a little more unrelenting. How sometimes you have like a low-grade fever. There's just low-grade fear, low-grade anxiety. And it sort of leads into compulsions. You find yourself going back to the same issues again and again, and you can't quite pull yourself out of it. The times when you're just sort of like on a hamster wheel of thinking through a problem with no resolution whatsoever. And the third level of fear is what we could call trauma, which is really the combination of fear with a profound sense of helplessness. And when fear and helplessness combine, it's a very powerful internal state where everything shuts down. You go into self-protection, and classically you go into fight or flight or freeze. I talked a little last week of how when we're in fear, we go into threat mode. And when you're in threat mode, the prefrontal cortex shuts down. And suddenly it's about survival. You're looking for simple solutions, and you're looking for any way you can just survive. When we can flip the switch and the prefrontal cortex flips back on again, we move from threat mode into opportunity mode, where you're not reacting, but now you have a capacity to respond. And the prefrontal cortex can say, this may be a little scary, but you're okay. You're going to be okay. Or, you've gone through this before, or it's not the end of the world. And it opens up long-term thinking. It opens up evaluative thinking. Well, let's see how this does, and maybe we can adjust, as opposed to being locked in to fear. So much of life is about stimulus and response. Something happens and you react. What mindfulness, or what we call non-judging awareness, does is it opens up the gap between stimulus and response. And just a little bit of a gap is the difference between reacting in a way you've always reacted before and being able to respond in a way that might be a little bit different. So the question becomes, how do we, when we're in threat mode, manage to shift ourselves back into opportunity mode, back into a form of resilience? So there are a number of strategies for working with fear, but to kind of explore the real fundamentals of them. The first one is learning how to move from the story in your head to the experience in the body. A very common fear nowadays is just a fear of what the heck is going to happen in the future. For many, it's really personal. For others, it's more of kind of a general feeling. So when you're gripped by fear, I like to think of it in terms of three basic roots of fear. One has to do with survival. Do I have enough money to get through this lifetime? What would I do if I lost my job? What would I do if I got sick? Where your very survival is activated, that issue. The second fear is about losing control. What'll happen to me if there's a collapse in the economy? What'll happen if there's anarchy? What'll happen if global warming goes berserk? Losing control, that sense of panic that can set in. And the third form of fear has to do with losing attention and affection and love. What if I spoke up at work and I got fired or ostracized? What if I did something and I lost all my friends? Or what if my family rejected me? What if I did something and I lost my partner? I find that to be very helpful when I'm beginning to investigate fear. Just a sense, can I get a sense of what the root of this is? Is it connected with survival? Is it connected with losing control? Is it connected with losing attention, affection, or love? And just being able to see it a little more clearly can be helpful. And as I say over and over again, when you can substitute the words, I want to fix this, with, I want to be more familiar with this. It's that familiarity that moves you toward wisdom. So I had the opportunity to sit with someone who was working through an issue that had to do with his fear of the future. And for him, it was very personal. He really didn't like his work. He'd been at it for a long time. He'd achieved some success, but he'd kind of like topped out in his career. He really wasn't going to be advancing anymore before his retirement. He worked for someone he really didn't like and didn't respect. There were ethical issues that really bugged him about where he was working. But he was too old to quit. And he wanted to speak up about what was going on, but he also didn't want to rock the boat and jeopardize himself. So he was really locked into this sense of fear about his future. So much of the time, we are in our story. We live in the mind, and we just live in our stories. And there's a wonderful phrase, which you may be familiar with, that says, your issues are in your tissues. That when you can move from the story to how your body holds it, there can be some very interesting insights there. So we explored this. I asked him to kind of think about the work, what it was like at its worst, and to begin to sense how his body held that whole situation. And he began to describe, a feeling of tight, feeling his guts just sort of like tighten up, kind of dry up, his heart sort of shutting down. And he began to describe just a feeling of resentment. He kind of felt that this tightness in his heart was some form of resentment. And he had a memory of going into law school because his father pressured him, and he really didn't want to. And I asked him how old that feeling was, that feeling of resentment, and he could really track it as being a very, very young feeling. And that kind of added to his feeling of being stuck and fearful that, I took this job that I knew I shouldn't have taken. I took a career I knew I shouldn't have taken. Now I'm stuck. I can't retire. I can't quit. I have to see it out. And he just sat with that very, very tight, afraid feeling. So what we were practicing there were kind of the three elements of RAIN: to recognize what's happening, to sense if you can allow it, and then to investigate it. And this primary investigation was, how did his body feel when he really got intimate with the situation? And what he was in touch with was a deep feeling of resentment and a deep feeling of being stuck. The end part of this equation is to nourish what's there with kindness or empathy. And this is a real critical part of the practice. One element of meditation is awareness, seeing clearly. But the other 50%, the other wing, is opening to compassion and kindness and empathy. So I asked him if he could just hold this with some kind of loving presence, with some kindness or with some compassion or empathy. And I asked him, is there a sense of what this needs? He said, I think it just wants attention. So I said, why don't you just let it know you see it? So he sat with it, breathing, and he began to report out a softening. He could sense how scared this feeling was inside. He could sense how young it was. And as he practiced just offering it empathy and compassion, something began to shift a little bit inside. Now, sometimes when you do this practice of seeing clearly, of asking if you can be with it, of being intimate with it, of really getting to the real pain of it, and then offering it kindness, compassion, empathy, sometimes it can be quite dramatic, and sometimes not so much. And for him, though, it wasn't a super dramatic insight, but it was a softening. Just the capacity to be with it. And I asked him, as part of this process, well, what advice do you have to give yourself? And he said, there are good people at work. There are some people I can talk to. And I don't have to live from my work. There are other things I want to do in my life as well. I don't have to be as identified as I was before. There's plenty of other stuff that I love in my life. I can do this. It was quite a powerful testimony. And again, oftentimes we're looking to fix, but quite often it's not so clean. It's just the willingness to really see what's there, the willingness to be intimate with it, and the willingness just to offer kindness, compassion, and empathy. They can just sort of soften things up a little bit. They can open up new possibilities. And he moved from threat mode, where he was shut down with no possibility, into kind of gliding into opportunity mode. Well, it's not that bad. There's a way I can maybe make this work. So we'll do a little exploration on this in a bit. So fear is in the mind, but fear is also in the body. And when you can move directly to the experience itself, it's quite interesting to find what's there. Quite often, the fear that you are feeling about something that's happening right now, oftentimes there's other associations with it. It has with it all of your patterning of self-protection that you can begin to see a little more clearly when you have that willingness to look more intimately and to really sense how it lives on the inside. As I'd like to say, it's an organic, kind of sloppy process, but it does bring you closer to what's there. Another way of exploring fear is exploring it in the mind and exploring it in the realm of the thoughts and the beliefs that you are holding about a particular situation. There's a great quote that says that fear is always the result of an unquestioned past imagined as the future. It's the result of an unquestioned past imagined as a future. So again, back to this fear of the future that is just so common, part of being human. Just another story of working with someone. This was a woman who was pretty locked into a rough situation in her life. Her marriage was unstable. They had financial issues. They had 3 kids. One was in college, 2 were in high school. One with special needs. She had given up her career a long time ago. And she felt stuck. And she felt kind of doomed in her relationship and her life. And so she was wanting to kind of explore this a little bit. So as we talked about this situation, and this was in reference to the work of Byron Katie, that is a very powerful way to explore beliefs. I asked her, once she told her story, I said, what's the core belief? Like, what are you believing here right at the center of things? And she said, I'm stuck and I'm doomed. That was what she was believing. So there are some elemental questions, 4 essential questions you can ask yourself once you've identified that core belief. And that's the key, is to really drill down. Like, what's the operative belief about this? What are you believing about yourself? What are you believing about your situation? And for her it was, I'm stuck and I'm doomed. So I asked her the first question. I said, so is that true? And she said, yes. Which leads to the second question. Is it really true? It took some time, because she certainly believed it. And oftentimes I'll say, with your permission, I'm going to nail you to the wall. Do you absolutely know beyond a shadow of a doubt that that belief is true? She said, well, intellectually I know that, but everything else in me believes that it is true. I said, that's okay. We just need to get a little crack in the wall here. And this leads to the next question. What is it like when you think that thought? Or I like the question, what's it like inside when you think that thought? And again, how does your body hold that belief? And she began to describe this felt sense that formed around that belief of feeling sick, feeling doubled over, feeling nausea, feeling weakness, feeling deeply unhappy. And again, I asked her, this feeling, is there a sense of how old this feeling is? And she said, this is ancient. And I've always felt like I'm weak. And I married my husband because he seemed so strong. And I felt that he would take care of everything, and that hasn't worked out. Which is that I've always looked outside myself for direction. And so we hung out with there. And in this process, it's so helpful to really take the time to deeply and intimately get how that belief operates, what it feels like, how your body holds it, the tendrils of it in this mind-body matrix. So we spent more time with that. When you have a sense of how that core belief is operative for you, then it can lead you to the fourth question, which is the samurai sword. And I asked her this question: who are you without that thought? There was a long, long pause and a stunned look on her face. And she said, I have no idea. And so I encouraged her just to be with that a little bit, just to hang out with that. And her face started to relax. The lines sort of smoothed out. And again, this was not a dramatic insight into new possibilities and a new life opening up for her, but it was a very powerful glimpse to just get a sense of who she was without that thought of I'm stuck and I'm doomed. And that began to be a building block for her to begin to explore a sense of inner resilience. And we began to explore times when she didn't feel stuck and to begin to sense aliveness and possibility. Byron Katie says, if you're afraid, find the core belief and ask yourself, is it true that I need to be fearful in this situation? What is actually happening right now physically? Where's my body? What do I see? And personalizing our stories gives us an opportunity to look at our circumstances more objectively and determine our responses to what life brings. Believing our untrue thoughts is a good way to scare ourselves to death. So when you find yourself caught in fear, it's very, very helpful to pause when you have the right conditions and turn from the story to really sense how that fear lives inside. Explore the power of being intimate with it and calling on kindness, compassion, empathy. Bring in that lubrication that will allow you to hold it in loving presence. And take the time to sense, what's the story I'm believing here? And is it true? To really investigate with rigor can be a very powerful way of freeing yourself. So there is another meditation that can be done that's very powerful for transforming fear. We speak of these two wings of the practice. One wing being wisdom, seeing clearly what's here. And the other wing being compassion, holding it with empathy, compassion, kindness. And fear has its sources in control, survival, losing attention and affection, but basically it's fear. It's just this elemental experience of fear that something is deeply wrong. So I'd like to share with you a meditation that draws on these two wings in a somewhat powerful and dramatic way. And it's a little bit different than what we do sort of in the Vipassana tradition, and that it comes from the Tibetan tradition, and it draws on some visualization. And I'm not someone who visualizes easy, and you may not be either. So you might want to find your own way with this. This practice is called Tonglen meditation. It's referred to as kind of ascending and receiving practice. And you visualize yourself taking in suffering and fear on the in-breath, and on the out-breath, giving it recognition and compassion and empathy. It's the practice of purification of the heart. It reduces self-centeredness. It increases your capacity to let go. It cultivates positive karma by giving and helping. And it expands your capacity for loving kindness. The Dalai Lama said this about the practice of Tonglen. I like this quote. He said, whether this meditation really helps others or not, it gives me peace of mind that I can be more effective, and the benefit is enormous. So to tell you a little bit about it and then I'll be guiding you through this. It's based on the breath, and it also draws on visualization. There are different ways you can practice it. But on the in-breath, you're sort of drawing in pain and suffering, your own or those around you who are struggling. And as you breathe in, you're breathing in the wish or the desire, the intention to be free. On the out-breath, you just relax on the out-breath. And you send space to yourself and to others that they can feel big enough to live with fear, to live with discomfort, to live with uncertainty. So as you breathe in, there's a wish to take away suffering. And as you breathe out, it's the wish to send comfort and happiness. This practice can seem a little counterintuitive. Like, why would you take on and invite in suffering? And if it feels like it's too much for you, you can just sort of make it work for you. You can sort of change it a little bit. So if you like, you can close your eyes. If any of this phraseology doesn't work for you, just make up your own. First, it's helpful to set an intention. The intention to open and expand and purify the heart. To be a force of transformation in this world. To be a bright light of healing and compassion. This practice is about cultivating relaxation and stillness and clarity. And it's helpful to reflect on the purity of your own heart. A quality of ease, a quality of fearlessness, where you feel composed, collected, and thoroughly present. You might imagine this refuge inside, like a beacon of light. This light that shines in the midst of the harshest elements. And you might think of this inner refuge as a quality of clarity and compassion. No matter what is happening externally, inside you and inside all beings, there is this refuge of clarity and compassion. And you might think of this as a quality of luminosity in the heart. If you're visual, you might imagine the luminosity of your essential being. And you might imagine it as a jewel in your heart, right here in the heart chakra, a radiant white light, the essence of purity and compassion and wisdom. And you might imagine now this quality of compassion, this luminous light within you, as the core of every being without exception. And take this time now to feel whatever fear or anxiety that you are carrying in your life. Imagine you could breathe it into this light in your heart and imagine it dissipating and disappearing and being transmuted by the power of this luminosity. And for these next moments, as you breathe in, imagine you could breathe in your fear, your anxiety, and feel it dissipating and disappearing on the exhalation. If there is anyone in your life who is in fear or struggling or in pain, you might imagine breathing in their suffering with the wish that it is transmuted, and exhaling, seeing it, releasing it, and wishing them well. If you wish, over these minutes, imagine you could expand your awareness out in all directions, considering this ocean of suffering, and with the inhale, and drawing it in into the purity of your heart, exhaling, seeing it transmuted. As you inhale, may each be free of suffering and its causes. And imagine this vanishing of suffering, a lifting of suffering of all beings in all directions. In these final minutes, you might imagine how this world could be relieved of suffering, how we might all realize our full potential. And imagine this light from your heart pouring out in all directions to the person on your left and right, behind you, in front of you, touching everyone around you. Imagine this luminosity at the core of each of us, released and alive and vibrant. And as you're ready, you can release the technique. And just take these moments to sit quietly. May all feel free of fear. May all feel happy. May all feel safe from inner and outer harm. May all feel free. And as you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. In a few minutes will end, and you can acknowledge those who have been sending you light all around you. But before that, a few announcements. I am leading a day-long retreat this Saturday. There's still a few openings if you're interested. It's on the power of inquiry and the questions that can transform your life. And I sent an email out this afternoon asking for your support for the church. And if you haven't read it, it's there waiting for you. The church is really needing all of our support to get under some financial duress. I'm so grateful for the church for how they've supported this class. I said in that email, some of you may remember we started with like 12 people downstairs. And really through the support of the church, we've really been nurtured over the years. And if you're not aware of all the amazing stuff that the church does in the world, it's so impressive. So there are 3 ways you can support the church. One is there's a link in the email. Another one is you can send a text and they'll get back to you regarding your pledge. And the third is if you'd like to give a direct donation of cash or check, Bob is right here. And he's got big pockets, and he'd be more than happy either this week or next week. Your support really makes a difference. And as well, your support for this class as well is so deeply appreciated. It helps keep this moving forward. So we've been talking about fear these last couple of weeks, and next week we're going to talk about what happens when fear isn't there, and that's about happiness. So that'll be fun. So may you and whatever's left of your fear have a great night together. Fear is most well remedied by cookies, and they're out there waiting for you. So thank you so much. Have a great night.